Everybody through? Yes. Thank you all for coming. You've all seen, I'm sure you've all bought my biography of Roy Badmin. I wrote it in 1985 when Roy was still alive. It was the first art book I ever wrote. Hitherto, yes, thank you. Could you hold it up, please? Hitherto, I'd just written extensive medical reports and comedy scripts. So it was my first art book, and I loved doing it. And I loved talking to the artist, spending hours and hours. I had to spend hours and hours because he was very reticent. It was very difficult getting anything out of him. But we managed over hundreds of days. I'd dash from surgery down to Sussex and get writing with Roy and trundle about the countryside. He taught me a lot. He set my artistic education and my thirst for watercolours, he set it going. He taught me to look at the countryside in the way that he did. And he taught me also so many things. Look, we've got a better speaker tonight. But the most important thing, and I've carried it with me all through my dealing career, is that the most important thing for a successful, living, talented artist is hard work. It's as banal as that. There's no use you can have all the talent in the world, but if you don't work at it, if you don't go through that process, if you don't apply yourself, if you're not motivated, if not for yourself, for your family, there's often a supportive family. If you don't have that, you will not have a successful career. And this man had a long, successful career. He was a worker. He put the hours in. And so many of my gallery artists do the same, and that's probably why they last, because I'm pretty difficult to put up with. They are hard worker, and the art, it justifies being here. And it just occurred to me, Leslie Fotherby's here tonight. All those years ago, when she was a young starting out artist, Badmin looked at her work and said, this girl should be an RWS artist. Well, the RWS, of course, has gone on a downward spiral since. They wouldn't recognise talent if it didn't.
Controversial.
Yes, well, we could divert here. Every declining society, broadly or narrowly, will decline if it elects inferior clones of itself relentlessly. It will decline, and that's what we have at the moment with the RWS. None of my gallery artists are members of the RWS, and they're all very successful, and the RWS is in the pits. Badmin worked what he called art school hours. But he was at the Royal College of Art 100 years ago.
Don't pinch all my lines.
The head of the Royal College at that time was Sir William Rothenstein, and Badmin's exact words, he ruled it with a rod of iron. A more benign and charismatic character ran the Royal College of Art from 1996 to 2009.
That's right.
Popular, charismatic, and pushed it forward, and did one wonderful thing which will be remembered forever, made me an honorary fellow. But for that I thank him. He will now tell you a little bit about Badmin, and why not? Because 100 years ago he was at the Royal College, and in the late 20th century this man epitomises the great success of the Royal College and the continuing success of the Royal College of Art. No downward spiral there since you left. Okay. Professor Sir Christopher Frayling.
Thank you very much, Chris. I was worried you were going to get all my lines, but it's very good. No, it's fun. Welcome everyone to this exhibition of the watercolours and etchings of Sr. Badmin. As he always signed himself, you'll notice very neat, rather humble lettering on the bottom of these pictures. Sr. Badmin, Stanley Roy Badmin, who's one of those artists, I think, whose name isn't that well known outside the charmed circle of this gallery, but whose achievements have affected the way in which we all see the world in various ways. in his case, the world of the English countryside, mainly English. I think there's a Welsh or two, is there?
There was a brief sojourn to America.
Right, oh, there's the America,
1935.
but mainly English rather than British, and of rural life on the cusp of mechanisation, which I always think is such an interesting moment. I can remember when I was at school, deep in the Sussex countryside, which Badmin loved, looking at the pictures in the old shell guides, which were on the library shelves, and leafing through the Puffin book of Village and Town, and the Ladybird book of Country Life, those sort of books, and looking at the pen and ink drawings and designs in the Radio Times, both the covers and the little sort of vignettes, in those days with the emphasis on the radio, rather than on photographs and television. And I can remember not giving a second thought to who actually drew and painted those very evocative illustrations. The credits were always in tiny letters, but the pictures have stayed in my mind with all sorts of associations for some 70 years, showing us things I could never keep still enough to see in real life, but he kept still enough to see in a way that we can see all around us. Do you remember those shell schoolroom posters of the, well, some of us of a certain age will remember these, the schoolroom posters of the natural world. You'd have field mice and moles and voles and stoats and weasels and hares, all clustered around bits of wood and details of the harvest, and all very brightly and carefully painted in colour. And there was always a helpful footnote at the bottom for those of us who grew up in the suburbs, in case we were going to be disappointed. It said, "Note, you will not find all these animals in the same place at the same time," which I always thought was what we used to call a swit. You know? And I always thought, it's rather a shame that you don't have these congregations of animals underneath these stalks of the harvest. So who drew and painted those posters and guides? Well, there were artists of the calibre of S.R. Badmin, and he was in the front rank of them, possibly at the head of the front rank. And his particular vision of the countryside, which is all around us, part Paradise Lost, part very detailed observation, part intense concentration and hard work, part invitation to look again, sometimes just a hint of surrealism, particularly in the shell guides, where you get unusual places and dislocated objects put together, a very sort of gentle form of surrealism, all of it based on the personal experience of someone standing in front of a small piece of the world and sharing what he felt about it. Which is, I think, what his art is about. And this distinctive vision, I think you've called it the Badmin touch in your Deathless book, has been enjoyed anonymously by millions of people in the last 70 years, and in fact longer than that, and not just people in the art world. When we look at the English countryside, I really do believe, as Chris has said, that we see it through his eyes, a case of nature imitating art. Because you never approach things innocently when you look at them. You have filters through which you see them, pairs of spectacles through which you see them, and a key pair of spectacles is Ed Badmin's work. And yet the name isn't well known enough. It's like those sculptures in public places that we all take for granted, where the plaque tells you all about the sponsor and the subject, but doesn't tell you about the artist who created them. It's like that. And as Thomas Hardy wrote, forgive me, Chris, in Under the Greenwood Tree, his silence was wonderful to listen to. And I feel that very strongly about Badmin. As Chris has said, this year is the centenary of S.R. Badmin's time at the Royal College of Art, and he arrived at the college on a studentship, which is an award for the quality of his portfolio, in 1924 at the age of 19, travelling by train every day to South Ken from his family home in Sydenham. After being accepted by the painting school, which, as you say, was under Professor, not yet Sir William Rothenstein, who also happened to be the principal of the college. He combined running the painting school with being the principal. Like, God knows how he did that. These days that would be very difficult. The young Stanley was based in the Exhibition Road building, which is now taken over by the Conservation Department at the V&A, with its large Victorian, not very well ventilated painting studios. It's very sad if you go there these days, because these beautiful tall ceilinged Victorian painting studios with mezzanine floors stuck in them so they can be turned into offices. A bit sad really, and also blocking the light. But the idea at that time was that if you went into one entrance of the V&A in Cromwell Road, you went for the heritage, and if you went through the side entrance, you went for contemporary art, and they were both part of a continuum. depending on which entrance you went in. So the students were expected as part of their course to draw and paint objects at the V&A, but most of their time was drawing and painting the naked human body in the life room. And William Rothenstein would walk around, rather a fearsome character, as you said, looking at the works and occasionally actually putting marks on them, which you'd never dared, you'd be sued if you did that today, but putting marks on the drawings and muttering about how Angres pencil drawings are a lot better than this. And he was fighting a kind of rearguard action against the latest fashion, against the new spirit in painting. As Rothenstein wrote, and I think Badmin would agree with this, "There stood the model, one of a succession of marvellous figures, each a miracle of form and colour. But God's work was no miracle to some students, who looked rather at Cézanne's and Picasso's. Cézanne's progeny might legitimately be called, after their father, Cézanne, these donkeys, but these later ones named Ces mulets, these mules, for they, I knew, would have no progeny, and my goodness, they were obstinate." So there you are, that's his view of art. And one day, famously, the professor set a project to draw a bull. I don't think there's a bull in this exhibition.
There's no bull.
Oh, well, there you go. No bull. Very good. And a student submitted a drawing in the style of Picasso, and Rothenstein said to him, "Now go to the zoo and do it again." That's that. And I think it can be safely said that Stanley Badmin was in this on the professor's side. Don't just look, but see. In 1925, halfway through his course at the college, 2 public sculptures were unveiled at Hyde Park Corner, causing a lot of controversy both in the press and within the college, and he must have been aware of this. One was by Francis Derwent Wood, the monument to the fallen of the Machine Gun Corps, and the other was by Charles Sergeant Jagger, the monument to the fallen of the Royal Artillery, you know, the stone howitzer with the bronze soldiers guarding it. Derwent Wood was an ex-RCA student, and until the previous year had been head of sculpture at the college, where he taught the young Charles Sergeant Jagger. In the press, the sculptures were seen as deeply opposed to each other. Here's a quote, one comment. "The Jagger howitzer was, quote, a violent gesture of rebellion against the aesthetic cliché embodied by its neighbour, the languorous David by Derwent Wood, which commemorates with sickening irrelevance the dead of the Machine Gun Corps." Now, we may or may not agree with that verdict, but as you go around Hyde Park Corner, you can see the apprentice outgrowing the sorcerer as you go round, the Jagger outgrowing his professor. And I'm sure that went down very well in the fine art departments of the Royal College of Art at the time. Realism and personal experience rather than cliches. And in the case of 1925, those who served, Jagger got an MC, and those who stayed at home and talked about it. There was that very strong feeling within the Royal College at the time, still in 1925. Anyway, this was the atmosphere during Badmin's first year. His teachers, all practicing artists rather than career academics, included Randolph Schwab, who you've had an exhibition here, I think, Leon Underwood, Cyril Mahoney, all ex-RCA students, as well as Walter Monington. They were all on the teaching staff. And his fellow students included Edward Burrough, at the same time as him, James Boswell, Elizabeth Vellicott, and very significantly, John Piper and Cecil Collins were students at the same time as Badmin. In the evenings, William Rothenstein liked to invite famous people who were sitting for his portrait drawings to hang around a bit and give informal talks to the students. And he had quite a roster of famous celebrities giving talks. We don't know if our artists went to any of them, but here's a list of some of the people who gave talks while Badmin was at the college. T.E. Lawrence, G.K. Chesterton, Rabindranath Tagore, Arnold Bennett, Edward Gordon Craig, Max Beerbohm came over from Rapallo. He was very friendly with Rothenstein, as well as several philosophers of the day who came, had their drawings done by Rothenstein, and then gave a talk afterwards. And these talks were the origins of a very famous college story, which was still going the rounds when I became rector, when I arrived at the college in the 1970s as a tutor. The story is this. A famous philosopher came to the Royal College under the aegis of the principal to give a series of 4 lectures to the painting students. And the total complement was 20 students, which is roughly the size of Badmin's year at the college, 20 students. So at his first lecture, there were 20 students. They were all terribly excited. He didn't show any pictures, which is fatal in that setting, and he quoted all sorts of authorities in several languages, which is also fatal. So at his second lecture of 4, there were 10 students. At his third lecture, there were 5 students. And at the end of the cycle, there was 1 solitary student. So the philosopher turned to the student and said, there's not much point in going on with this, is there, just with you and me? Why don't we just have a cup of tea and talk about it? To which the student replied, I do wish you would go on. I've been trying to draw you for 4 weeks. Now that student could have been Stanley Badmin, I think, because I'm sure he wasn't very interested or had much time for the pretentious Esperanto of art theory. It wasn't his thing. And then at the end of his first year, Badmin asked to be transferred to the design school, out of the painting school, for the remainder of his course. That's the 2 years from 1925 to 1927. In those days, you did a 3 and possibly 4-year course. Gosh, that has changed. It's much shorter now. The design school, where in those days they taught watercolour painting, book illustration, wood engraving, lino cutting, and for the most advanced students, etching under Malcolm Osborne and Robert Austin. And you can see the attraction for someone of Badmin's. It's applied art as much as fine art. Emphasis on the craft as much as the art. And the school was very much under the influence of recent graduates, Edward Borden, Eric Revilius, they'd left the previous year, Helen Binion and Charles Tunnicliffe, all of whom had left the previous year, and who were still around as visiting tutors in 1925. They were a very strong influence, I think, on the design school. And the design tutor, Paul Nash, who had left also the previous year, Rothenstein had this rather nice idea of parachuting a well-known artist into the design school, rather than always teaching the painters, but Nash couldn't take it and left the previous year. The rediscovery of Samuel Palmer and William Blake was in full swing in the mid-1920s, and there were important exhibitions of both. And I think if you look at Badmin's etchings, you can see the influence of Samuel Palmer, definitely. And the students were encouraged, while still students, much more than they had been in fine art, to get out there, to paint murals, become involved in community arts, publish, join professional societies, and create their own networks during the art boom of the mid-1920s. The fine art students tended to look down on the design school, too applied, too commercial. Famously, one painter of a little bit later in the history of the college said, "Oh, the design school, isn't that where they mend fuses?" The professor overseeing all this in a benign and antiquarian way was Ernest Tristram, or Trissy, as he was known by the students. He was a medievalist who specialised in cathedral wall paintings, and he seemed much more interested in the Venerable Bede than he was in Picasso. So there was no danger of modernism reaching the design school under Professor Tristram. Stanley Badmin took full advantage of the courses on offer, stayed part-time to use the etching studio. You'll notice in the captions to the etchings, a lot of them were done on the Royal College presses in the 2 years after he left. Within a couple of years of getting his ARCA, his diploma in those days, they didn't give degrees in those days, he'd been published in prestigious art magazines. This is within 2 years of graduating. Produced his own etchings, made on the college presses, exhibited at the Royal Academy, had his first solo show, and become an associate of the Royal Society of Painters in Watercolours, the RWS, in its heyday. At the age of 26, one of the youngest ever to have done so. In fact, he exhibited with the RWS in their spring, summer and winter shows, with one exception, 1 year, every single year between 1932 and 1989, which is quite extraordinary, an astonishing achievement of nearly 60 years. So he was well on his way within a couple of years of graduating. But it was Chris Beetles, I think, who in 1985 drew the art world's attention to the resulting work, the Badmin Touch, and not before time, with a big exhibition and the publication, which you can hold up again if you like, S.R. Badmin, the English language, English landscape. And it feels just right to me that the show should be taking place here at this time, some 40 years later. An exhibition of drawings, watercolours, etchings, illustrations, colour tests of various kinds, all focused on the countryside, rural life and rural crafts, wheelwrights, farming, carters, etc. When I was in the west of Ireland, a little autobiographical ending, when I was in the west of Ireland a few years ago, I visited my wife's aunt, Eva, in her care home. She'd spent a whole professional career promoting the Irish rural crafts in the countryside through exhibitions and demonstrations and photographs and paintings. But now she had dementia. And I tried to chat with her in her care home. She kept saying the word craft, craft, craft over and over again. And I thought it is either a reference to the way in which she spent her professional career promoting the rural crafts, or maybe a reference to occupational therapy in the care home, craft, you know. Maybe they did potato cards, or I don't know. Anyway, no, she kept saying with increasing frustration, craft, C-R-A-F-T, can't remember a feckin' thing. Well, it's largely thanks to Chris that we have no trouble at all remembering and continuing to remember the name of S.R. Badmin. And so I'm delighted to be reminded this evening that this artist's silence was indeed a wonderful thing to listen to. Thank you very much.